I'm Jeremy Hickerson, and this is All of Life. This is a reading from my literary memoir entitled Now, Then, and Then. The chapter is called A New Place. And bear with me, my dog Griff here is sitting right behind me in the chair because we had somebody setting off fireworks and he doesn't like the loud noises all of a sudden, which is something new for him, but I'm not too surprised. All right, A New Place. These are the first 5 pages of the chapter. From Now, Then, and Then. A new place. I had been out of my parents' house for 2 years, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Portland at 158th and Gleason, when I moved into a rental house with a yard and got my first dog. After living at home for so many years, getting the Gleason apartment had been great, even though it wasn't much, average to low end as apartments in Portland go. It was small and somewhat dingy and had dull-colored shag carpet over most of the floor. The kitchen and the bathroom had worn linoleum, brick orange in the kitchen and off-white in the bathroom. Rent was $250 a month. The apartment was difficult to keep cool in the summer. Even if I opened the street side windows and the bedroom window on the other side, there was hardly any cross draft. I was on the 2nd floor, so that was probably a little hotter anyway. With the windows open, I heard all the noise from Gleason Street, which was a main thoroughfare. There was always traffic, even in the middle of the night. Since the building was not set back from the street, the noise from passing vehicles was pretty loud, even in the bedroom. When I first moved in, I was working a late shift at the lab. I hadn't yet had time to stock my refrigerator, so when I got home from work at 8:30 p.m., I walked over to the Thriftway on 162nd and bought a loaf of bread, some cheese, a Thuringer sausage, and a 6-pack of beer. I ate my sandwich, then spent the rest of the evening reading Kafka's Metamorphosis, which was in a book I had borrowed from Mark Rosenau. Mark had been an English major and was always reading something interesting. He went to my church and had also been at PSU when I was there. He lived just a block away over on 157th with his wife and 4 kids. The eerie atmosphere of Kafka's story fit well with the Spartan shabby unfamiliarity of my new living quarters. I had some great times in that apartment, listening to early Beatles albums and learning the guitar parts, recording a radio documentary of Led Zeppelin that was broadcast on KGON, visiting over at the Rosenau's house. They were always very kind to me and thought nothing of adding one more person to the dinner table. The family warmth they shared so easily was no small thing to me, and many times kept me from falling into despair and loneliness. I was almost kicked out of that apartment when I spent my rent money on a Gibson ES 335. I thought I could pay the rent a few days late, but when my next paycheck came, a pang of fear hit my stomach when I came home from work on the 3rd day of the month and saw the eviction notice on my door. I asked Dad for a loan, but he wisely refused. I hated him for it at the time and swore I would never come begging to Mom and Dad again, hating the embarrassment of having revealed my childishness, hating that I hadn't seen until now that an adult doesn't ask another adult for money. Fortunately, I was able to scrape together the rent by raiding my account at the Federal Employees Credit Union. After 2 years in the East County apartment, I had the opportunity to move into a house when one of my coworkers transferred to an office in Seattle. He had been renting a place near Sandy Boulevard, not far from the Portland airport. He told me the house was available and I was able to get in when he moved out. The rent was higher, but it was only $375 a month. For a house with a yard, that was amazingly low. The rental house was an old, very modest 2-bedroom single story, a bungalow, I suppose. It might have been built in the 1930s, but it was solid enough and really quite pleasant, especially compared to my apartment. It had rattan blinds on all the windows, and this gave it a sort of nostalgic feel, like a beach house in an old movie. The best feature of my new place was its enormous yard, maybe 1/3 of an acre, with a number of fruit trees, 2 varieties of cherry, a peach, a plum, and a crabapple, and a row of raspberries. The front yard was normal size, but the backyard seemed to go on and on. About 50 feet back was a huge bay tree, 70 feet tall and 20 feet across. Behind that was practically a second backyard with a crabapple tree on the left. The yard ended in a wall of blackberry brambles, but on the side was an opening in the blackberries you could walk back further. About 10 feet beyond the blackberries were some grapes. A little further, a large empty swimming pool, tiled in a classic style that had to be from an earlier time, maybe the 1950s. Was this part of my yard too? I didn't see any house near the pool, but somehow I didn't think so. Behind this area was the backyard of the house on the other side of the block, which was Prescott Street. I lived on Going Street off 71st. I was excited about having a yard. For one thing, now I could have a dog. My coworker had a German Shepherd, so I knew it was okay. The landlords, a couple who lived out in the country in Malala, didn't even charge me an extra deposit. A few days before I moved in, I was over at my parents', and Dad and I went out to pick up some pizza. There was a pet store next door with a puppy in a cage all by himself. The rest of his litter had been sold. He was all alone. He had been crying so much that when I picked him up, he made a continual hiccuping sound as if he had swallowed a lot of air. He was so small and warm and furry, and was suddenly calm as I held him. I looked at the paper taped to his cage. He was only 6 weeks old and was an Australian cattle dog mix, just like the dog we had when I was a kid. Now, a little aside, that's not true. That's about the only thing in this story that isn't true. I made up a story about a dog I had when I was a kid that was a cattle dog, and that I also was able to do some mental telepathy with. That is not true, but everything else in here of the 400 pages is true, so I had to make this part fit with that. Anyway, he looked just like the cattle dog, just like the dog we had when I was a kid. I bought the puppy, and as Dad and I drove home with the pizza, I decided to name him George after my childhood dog. So I really did get this dog George, though, when I was in the rental house. And anyway, I want to just say that it was quite important to me to really tell the truth as I wrote all of this memoir. And I also thought that my interesting relationship with dogs and how important they are to me, when the story about the telepathic dog came to me, and I included that, it was fiction, and that's the only thing that is fiction in this, and yet it fits somehow. So that's why it's in there. Thank you. I bought the puppy, and as Dad and I drove home with the pizza, I decided to name him George after my childhood dog. And I really did name this dog I got at the rental place George. It was Thursday, and I was due to move in Monday. I figured I could hide him in my apartment for that long. When I got home, I put him in a large cardboard box, after I had covered the bottom of it with newspaper. Of course, I let him run around and played with him too. But at night, when I turned out the light, he started howling, even though his box was right next to my bed. I grabbed him quickly, hoping no one had heard. Maybe if I kept him in the bed with me. But that didn't work either. He wanted to play, and I was trying to sleep. He kept nipping at me, and his tiny teeth were needle sharp. It was midnight. I had to do something. Without giving it a second thought, I picked up the phone and called my parents. Dad answered. It was obvious I had woken him up. I apologized for waking him, then got to the point. Dad, George won't stop howling. I'm afraid someone at the apartment will complain. Can I come over? Sure, he said sleepily. I drove across the bridge to their house in Vancouver and took George inside. I ended up putting him in the bathroom. He howled, but the noise wasn't too bad with the door closed. After half an hour, he stopped, and we all went to sleep. The next morning, I got up and let George out of the bathroom. He went crazy, barking and jumping up and down. He was so glad to see me. I got a tennis ball and rolled it for him so he could chase it. Then I gave him breakfast, some canned dog food. He wolfed it down. I had to go to work, so I put him back in the bathroom with some water. I laid down newspapers in the corner. When I got home that evening, Dad told me George had howled for 20 minutes after I left. I wanted to take George for a walk, but he was tiny, only about a foot long, like a small cat. Dad suggested I try the cat leash, the one they sometimes walk their cats with. The leash went around the cat's belly and front legs. It would fit George just fine. We went for a walk around the neighborhood and George loved it. He had an incredible amount of energy, even for a puppy. Finally, Monday came, and I moved into the rental house. I needed some sort of enclosure to put George in when I was at work. So I went to the hardware store and got a 25-foot roll of thick wire fencing. I installed it by the side of the backyard, against the neighbor's fence, sticking the wire ends into the ground and making a pin 15 feet long by 5 feet wide. The fence was only 3 feet high, so I didn't make a gate. I could just push it down a little and step over it. I put George's water dish in an area of the pin that was shaded by one of the cherry trees. When I came home from work the next day, I went straight to the backyard to take George out of the pen. The neighbor couple were sitting in the lawn chairs on their side of the fence, the wife maybe mid-30s, looking kind of sexy in a one-piece bathing suit. George wasn't in the pen. He was over in their yard. "I'm sorry," I said. "Did he get out?" "Oh no," the wife said. "We brought him over to play with our dogs." They had a yellow lab and a big Newfoundland. "Thanks," I said, not meaning it. Sure, it was great that George had received some attention while I was gone. I felt bad that I had to leave him penned up all day, but it seemed a little presumptuous of them. The moment I had walked up, George had stopped playing with the other dogs and started barking excitedly. Now the wife picked him up and handed him over the fence to me. He immediately tried to lick my face. I stroked his head and ears. I was glad to see him, too. "He really gets bored, cooped up all day," she said. It sounded like an accusation. "I know," I said. She was right, of course, but why tell me? What was I supposed to do? I had to go to work during the day. The husband got up, introduced himself, and shook my hand over the fence. Thanks for watching and listening. If you like this channel and what you heard, please subscribe and click like. I'll see you next time.